I want you to just picture the global stage for a second. Think back to 1978.
Right.
If you look at the headlines from that year, you hear this absolute roar of geopolitics, like the endless churning machinery of the oil industry.
Oh, absolutely. The scale of it is wild.
It really is. And the financial numbers are just staggering. In 1978, the five sister U.S. oil corporations saw their profits explode by 343% over the previous year.
Wow. 343%.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of global capital on a scale that is, frankly, almost hard to comprehend. But, and this is the massive hook for today, underneath all of that noise, underneath the popping champagne corks in those boardrooms, there is this completely invisible, silent machinery grinding away.
And the numbers there tell a very, very different story.
Exactly. Because while those profits skyrocketed, in the Arab region, 1 million infants died before their first birthday.
Just a horrific contrast. They died of poverty. They died of malnutrition. And the source material we are looking at today notes a statistic that honestly is going to stick with me for a long time.
What is it?
The food intake of those starving infants was merely 1/10 of what was being fed to an American pet dog.
That is just, wow. It's a profound and, frankly, sickening juxtaposition.
Right.
But it is the exact lens we need to look through for this deep dive. The overarching question being asked here is, why does the celebration of global capital always seem to require and then deliberately drown out the cries of the vulnerable?
Like it's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. The roaring engines of international wealth and geopolitical domination, they don't just happen to mask the weeping of the oppressed. They literally rely on it.
And today, our mission is to look directly at the people who are caught in those gears. We are going to tear down the walls of our most comfortable assumptions. We are taking a staggering, paradigm-shifting deep dive into Nawal El Saadawi's landmark book, The Hidden Face of Eve.
It's an incredible piece of work.
It really is. We are looking at the invisible machinery of class, of capitalism, and the patriarchal structures that have shaped the lives of Arab women, and honestly, the lives of women globally.
Yeah, because what makes this text so powerful is the vantage point. You know, most history books operate from the throne room or the battlefield.
Right, they look at treaties and trade agreements.
Exactly. But Saadawi looks at the world from the locked bedroom. She looks at it from the operating table. She is tracing the macroeconomics of the globe all the way down to the physical bodies of individual women.
And before we go any further into how she does that, I want to set some ground rules for you listener. Let's just put this right on the table.
Yeah, we need to be clear about this.
Saadawi pulls zero punches. The text we are exploring today contains highly politically charged viewpoints. She launches fierce, uncompromising critiques against Western capitalism, against imperialism, Zionism, and against Islamic fundamentalism.
She essentially takes aim at every major power structure on the board.
Right. So, our job today isn't to agree or disagree with her politics. Both of us here are acting strictly as your guides.
Completely impartial.
100%. We are not taking any political sides. We are simply going to hold a magnifying glass to her text, reporting these provocative ideas exactly as they appear in her writing, so you can understand the explosive arguments she made.
We are essentially filming a documentary of her mind today. We're going to pan the camera across her findings, unpack the logic she uses, and, try to understand this incredibly complex web of oppression she mapped out.
So let's start with how she was even in a position to map this out, because her personal trajectory is wild.
It really is.
You don't usually see someone at the absolute pinnacle of state power suddenly get thrown into a cold prison cell, but that is exactly what happened to her. Let's trace her path for a second.
Okay, lay it out.
She graduates from Cairo University Medical School in 1955. She rises rapidly through the ranks, and by 1963, she is the Director General for Public Health Education in Egypt.
Right, so she is not an outsider shouting at the gates. She is the establishment.
Exactly.
She is sitting at the highest levels of government healthcare, which gives her unprecedented access to the data, the policies, and the raw physical realities of the population.
But then the floor just completely falls out. In 1972, she is fired from her position. The health magazine she founded is forcibly shut down by the authorities.
And it gets worse.
Yeah. By 1981, she is locked in a prison cell for criticizing the president. I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanism of that fall. How does a top medical official become an enemy of the state?
Wow.
It feels like a lead structural engineer being arrested and thrown in jail simply because she discovered the concrete in the National Dam was made of sand and she warned people it was going to collapse.
You know, that analogy actually captures the dynamic perfectly.
Really?
Yeah. The state wanted a doctor who would treat the symptoms, give out the medicine, write the reports, keep the workforce functional. But she wasn't just a bureaucrat. She was a psychiatrist.
Oh.
And she realized you cannot treat the psychological and physical traumas of the women she was seeing without addressing the environment causing them. She started using her pen to cut through the hypocritical, polite skin of society.
Like a scalpel.
Exactly like a scalpel. She was exposing the mutilated bodies beneath the surface, showing that the private, hidden traumas of these women were directly connected to the political and economic structures the government was protecting.
So by pointing out that the sickness was structural, she became a threat to the structure itself.
Yes. When you connect a woman's individual suffering in a rural village to the broader economic policies of the state and global capitalism, you are no longer practicing medicine.
What are you practicing?
In the eyes of the authorities, you are practicing treason.
Wow. And the most visceral physical example of this structural trauma, the thing that really starts this deep dive into the darkest corners of society, begins with children.
It does. It begins with the physical body.
And this brings us to a question that is incredibly difficult to talk about, but Saadawi forces us to look at it. We are talking about female circumcision.
Right.
And the initial assumption most people make is that this is a tragedy born entirely out of extreme poverty or a total lack of education.
That is the comfortable narrative, right? It allows modern society to distance itself from the practice.
Totally.
We tell ourselves it only happens in remote, uneducated areas and that modern schooling will naturally erase it.
But Saadawi brings the data, and the numbers completely destroy that comfortable story. The statistics in her source material are a massive shock.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so among uneducated families in the study, the circumcision rate was 97.5%.
Okay, so that fits the assumption.
Right. But then look at the educated urban families, a staggering 66.2%.
That is wild.
I know. That means well over half of the families who have access to schools, who read, who consider themselves modern, are still doing this. This isn't just a rural issue.
No, it is a systemic cross-class phenomenon. And to understand why those educated families are still doing it, we have to look at the raw reality of what is actually happening.
Yeah, walk us through that.
Saadawi describes it from her own childhood memories and from the countless patients she treated. We're talking about a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She is dragged from her bed,
Oh, God.
pinned down by her own family members. There is no hospital. There is no anesthesia. There is only a local midwife, known as the Daya, wielding in a rusty razor blade.
It's unfiltered trauma. I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone listening to this right now in a modern city, and the immediate thought is, why?
Right.
Why would a mother, a father, who presumably loves their child, subject them to an anesthetic-free nightmare?
Because in this societal structure, the physical completeness of a female child is viewed as a massive economic and social liability.
A liability.
Families are operating under a twisted logic enforced by the wider culture. They're literally trading a piece of a child's flesh for the illusion of purity and, more importantly, family honor.
Explain the mechanism there. How does mutilation equal honor?
Well, there is no logic to it biologically, but the social mechanism is based on fear. The physical mutilation is explicitly designed to reduce or remove sexual desire.
Okay.
The patriarchal system demands absolute certainty that a girl remains a virgin until marriage and that she remains faithful after. Her body is being surgically altered to guarantee her status as an untouched, compliant commodity for a future husband.
So her body doesn't even belong to her. It belongs to the family's reputation.
Exactly. They're damaging her to prove to the neighbors and the future husband that she is safe to acquire.
And that is why the education level of the parents doesn't drop the rate to 0.
Precisely. You can have a university degree, but if your family's social standing, your marriage prospects, and your community's survival still depend on this brutal currency of honor, you will conform to the practice.
You would think, though, that the medical community, the people of science, the ones writing the textbooks, would step in.
You really would.
You would think doctors would be screaming from the rooftops to stop this mutilation of anatomy. But they aren't. In fact, Saadawi reveals something about the medical establishment that is completely anti-common sense.
Yes.
Why do the world's top medical textbooks detail every microscopic male nerve but deliberately erase the most critical female organ?
This is where we see that science is never neutral. Saadawi shares a very revealing memory from her time in medical school.
What happened?
During an anatomy class, a female medical student raises her hand and asks the professor a basic anatomical question about the clitoris.
A completely standard question in an anatomy class.
Exactly. And the professor's reaction is to turn beet red. He yells at her in front of the entire lecture hall.
Are you kidding me?
No. He tells her it won't be on the exam and screams that the organ is meaningless.
Think about the implications of that word, meaningless. The professor, the ultimate authority on the human body, is actively erasing female biology from the curriculum.
Medicine is supposed to be pure, objective observation of what exists. But here, the medical textbook operates as an extension of patriarchal control.
I am struggling to process the blatant hypocrisy of that. If it's not in the textbook, the doctors aren't trained on it.
Right.
And if they aren't trained on it, they don't acknowledge its function or its importance.
And if the medical establishment doesn't acknowledge it, they are quietly validating the social practice of cutting it away.
Wow.
By institutionalizing ignorance, the medical field provides cover for the cultural mutilation. They're essentially saying, society says this part of women shouldn't exist, so science will pretend it doesn't.
It's a deliberate blind spot. And that blind spot gets even more dangerous when we look at the other focal point of a woman's body in this society.
The hymen.
Right. We are moving from what is cut away to what is demanded to be present. This is where a biological lie literally becomes a matter of life and death.
The societal expectation surrounding the hymen is incredibly rigid and binary. On the wedding night, the bride and groom go into a room. There must be a physical tear, and there must be red blood produced on a white sheet.
That blood is the ultimate proof of virginity.
Yes.
And if there isn't blood?
Then she is disgraced.
Yeah.
And the consequences are catastrophic. She could be immediately divorced, her family ostracized, or, and this happens, she could be murdered by her own father or brothers to cleanse the shame from the family name.
The entire weight of a family's dignity rests on a single drop of blood from a specific membrane.
It does.
But Saadawi brings the hard clinical data to this cultural guillotine, and the numbers are terrifying when you realize lives depend on them. Let's break down the actual physiology of the hymen from the text, because biology does not care about cultural expectations.
Let's do it.
The data shows that 11.2% of women are born with highly elastic hymens. They simply will not tear during normal intercourse.
They will stretch, but they won't bleed.
Right. Then 16.16% have membranes so incredibly thin that they tear naturally from basic childhood activities, sports, riding a bike, just growing up.
Completely natural wear and tear.
Exactly. Another 31.32% have thick membranes lacking a proper opening, which actually require medical surgery just so the girl can menstruate.
So if you add all of those physiological variations up, you are left with a startling reality.
Bitches.
Only about 41% of women possess what society would classify as a normal hymen that behaves the way the cultural myth expects it to on a wedding night.
Which means, statistically, well over 30% of women will never, ever bleed on their first night, no matter what.
Never.
They are complete virgins, they have followed every social rule, and their own biology is going to betray them to a society that refuses to understand science.
This is why Saadawi emphasizes that the hymen is not a biological necessity. It serves absolutely no physiological function for the human body.
So what is it?
It is entirely a cultural trap. It is a mechanism of control built on mass ignorance. When you tie a woman's right to live to a biological event that fails to happen over 30% of the time, you create a state of constant, paralyzing fear.
And that fear culminates in a wedding night ritual that sounds like a literal horror movie.
Yeah.
If the biology is so unreliable, but the cultural demand for blood is absolute, reality is forced to bend.
Oh, absolutely. Families literally manufacture the evidence.
Yes. Why does a family's dignity require a midwife's dirty fingernail to tear into a bride just to fake a blood sting?
Because the show must go on. The optics are more important than the truth.
Right.
Saadawi describes these traditional rural wedding nights where the pressure is immense.
Right.
The guests are waiting outside, the drums are beating. If the natural biology fails, which, as we just established, happens constantly, the groom, whose hands are accustomed to gripping a rough agricultural plow, is brutally forced into the bride to cause damage.
And if that doesn't work, The local midwife, steps in. She uses her long, unwashed fingernail to literally slice into the interior vaginal wall of the bride.
Just to produce a steady stream of red blood.
It's an orchestrated, violent assault. The bride is hemorrhaging. She is in sheer agony. She's exposed to massive risk of infection. And meanwhile, what is happening outside the door?
The father is proudly waving a blood-soaked white towel to a cheering crowd.
It is a profound triumph of patriarchal optics over female humanity. The individual suffering of the woman is completely irrelevant.
It really is. The blood on the towel serves two economic and social functions.
Which are?
It is a receipt of purchase for the husband, proving he got an undamaged good.
Yeah.
And it is a certificate of good standing for the father, proving he successfully controlled his daughter.
I want to pause on that phrase, receipt of purchase. It really is a transaction. They are putting on a theatrical performance of violence just to satisfy the neighbors. Nobody actually cares about purity. They only care about the applause. And the double standard of this honor system is staggering. A woman's biology can condemn her, but a man's barest suspicion is treated as holy truth. We see this in a horrific story from the text.
Yeah, this one is tough.
Why is male suspicion a license to kill, while a female's misread medicine bottle costs her life?
Saadawi recounts a case that perfectly illustrates how asymmetrical this system of honor really is. She tells the story of a young engineer. And it's crucial to note, as you mentioned earlier, that he is German-educated.
Right, he is not an uneducated man from an isolated village. He represents the modern elite.
He has the mask of modernity. But the underlying programming is exactly the same. He suspects his 17-year-old sister is pregnant.
Based on what?
His entire basis for this suspicion is that he finds a bottle of medicine in her room. He assumes it's for pregnancy.
He doesn't sit her down and ask her about it. He doesn't take her to a doctor to confirm anything.
Nope. His immediate reflective action is to murder her. He slaughters his own teenage sister.
And when the authorities perform the autopsy, the medical truth comes out. She was a complete virgin. The medicine had absolutely nothing to do with pregnancy.
It was a tragic, paranoid mistake on his part.
Yeah.
But the true horror isn't just his action. It's the legal system's reaction.
What does the court do?
They let him walk.
The justice system pats him on the back and releases him under the guise that he was defending family honor.
It's unbelievable.
He makes an idiotic, fatal mistake, murders an innocent girl, and the state essentially sanctions it.
This exposes the core mechanism of patriarchy. In this system, a man's honor is external. It is kept in his pocket.
In his pocket.
Yeah. His sexual conquests, his affairs, his violent mistakes, they are either invisible to his social standing or they are actively celebrated as medals of his virility.
But a woman's honor
Is located entirely within the fragile boundaries of her physical body. Honor is a one-way chain. A man can break it with complete impunity, but a woman is strangled by it just for breathing the wrong way.
Which brings us to an incredibly dark realization about where women are supposed to be safe. We are told our whole lives that the family home is our ultimate sanctuary.
Right. The safe harbor.
It's the safe harbor from the dangers of the outside world. But if honor is a one-way chain held by the men in the house, what happens behind closed doors? Why is the family home statistically the most dangerous place on earth for a girl?
The statistics Saadawi uncovered in 1973 regarding child sexual abuse completely shatter the myth of the safe family home. And again, she breaks it down by class to show it is a structural issue, not an anomaly.
Let's look at those numbers.
In uneducated homes, the rate of sexual aggression against female children was 45%.
Almost half, and in educated homes.
33.7%.
Let's give that some context for the listener. Kinsey's famous study in the United States around the same era showed a 24% rate of abuse. So the numbers Saadawi is finding are astronomically higher.
Much higher.
And the perpetrators aren't strangers jumping out of dark alleys. The perpetrators are uncles. They are older brothers. They are fathers.
We have to look at the environment that creates these numbers. This society is highly segregated. It fiercely suppresses all natural sexual expression outside of marriage. Men are denied access to women outside the home.
Right.
At the same time, the culture concentrates absolute, unquestionable male authority within the closed walls of the family home. When you combine intense sexual repression with absolute unchecked power over a vulnerable population, young girls' abuse is the mathematical result.
I am trying to understand the psychological toll of this. How does society function with this massive amount of trauma happening right in the living room? How does a child survive this without the whole world knowing?
Saadawi, speaking as a psychiatrist, explains the mechanism of survival. They survive through a phenomenon called childhood amnesia.
Can you break down how that works? It sounds like a computer reformatting a corrupted hard drive just so the machine can boot up the next day.
That is a very accurate way to think about it. The trauma is so severe and the power dynamic is so utterly inescapable that the child's mind simply cannot process it and continue to function.
Because they can't leave.
Exactly. The child has no physical escape. She has to wake up the next morning, sit at the breakfast table, and watch her abuser be worshipped and respected as the head of the household.
That's horrifying.
So the brain partitions the drive. It locks the memories in a mental vault. The child buries the trauma in order to survive the daily reality of her environment.
But sometimes the vault opens. Sometimes the abuse makes it out into the light of day. And you would think that when society finally sees it, the authorities would rush in to rescue the child.
But that's not what happens.
No. The system steps in to protect the predator. Why does the legal system protect the freedom of a criminal under the sickening guise of protecting the victim's reputation?
Saadawi outlines court cases that defy all logical concepts of justice, but make perfect sense under the logic of patriarchy. She cites a specific case of a male teacher.
What did he do?
He systematically sexually abused multiple young schoolgirls in his class. He is finally caught. The evidence is there. But instead of throwing him in a dark prison cell, the court makes a staggering decision.
They just transfer him. They move him to a different administrative job in a different location.
And their official reasoning is the part that makes my blood boil.
Yeah, the court claims that a public criminal trial would ruin the honor of the little girls and their families.
It is the ultimate systemic gaslighting. The legal system claims to be acting in the best interest of the victims by saving them from public shame. But what is the actual mechanism at play here?
They're protecting the institution.
The scale of justice tilts deliberately to protect the powerful male institution. By prioritizing reputation over justice, the legal system sentences the girls to be lifelong psychological prisoners of their trauma in silence.
Because if they speak, they ruin their own honor.
Exactly. They can never speak of it. Meanwhile, the criminals safely move to a new hunting ground, completely unpunished.
The system is engineered from the ground up to prioritize male convenience and institutional stability over female survival. And, speaking of male convenience, there is an entire underclass of women who serve as the hidden release valve for this highly repressed society.
The domestic workers.
Yes. Why do the most respectable, moral gentlemen instantly drop their masks when they are alone with the maid?
We have to look at the labor data Saadawi provides. Domestic workers, maids, make up 9.3% of the female service workforce.
That's a huge chunk.
It is. These are overwhelmingly poor women, very often migrating from rural villages to the cities to survive. They occupy a terrifyingly vulnerable position in the social hierarchy. And Saadawi observes that they are systematically utilized by middle-class and upper-class men as free, consequence-free sexual outlets.
Wait, I'm trying to connect the dots here. Society is highly segregated. Prostitution exists, but it's illegal, costs money, carries the risk of venereal disease, and risks public exposure. So the respectable middle-class man avoids the brothel. Instead, he turns to the maids sleeping in the spare room. Because she lacks any social, financial, or legal power to fight back, the system actually incentivizes abusing her.
You're hitting on the exact economic and social intersection. It's the perfect storm of class and gender oppression. The man gets his clean, secret outlet without risking his public morality.
But let's follow the chain of causality. What happens when the inevitable occurs? What happens when the maid gets pregnant?
The hammer comes down entirely on her. She is immediately fired. She is thrown out into the street. She is utterly disgraced.
And as we discussed earlier with the hymen and the honor killings, she might actually be murdered by her own impoverished family back in the village for bringing shame upon them.
While the gentleman who caused the pregnancy remains entirely untouched. He remains a pillar of the community, a respected father, and a devoted husband.
The class divide acts as an impenetrable shield for his morality, while her poverty guarantees her total destruction.
It's an invisible slaughterhouse.
Which brings us to the women who are legally married to these men. The wives who are protected by the law, the mothers who are revered by the culture.
Ah, yes, the sanctity of motherhood.
Right. We hear endless poems and religious sermons about the sanctity of motherhood. But Saadawi asks a brilliant, piercing question. Is the wholly untouchable concept of motherhood actually just the most perfectly engineered system of unpaid labor in human history?
When you strip away the poetry and the romantic facade, and you look at motherhood purely through the lens of economics, the picture changes completely. Society elevates motherhood to the heavens. It calls it a sacred duty.
But practically speaking, what is the wife's actual job description?
Well, let's list it out.
Let's translate this into modern gig economy terms. It's the ultimate free subscription service for the husband and the state. She is the chef, she is the cleaner, she is the nanny, she is the sexual partner, she's the live-in nurse.
All in one.
She performs all of these distinct, highly demanding jobs without a salary, without benefits, without sick leave, and without a union.
And her legal protections, the safety nets for this unpaid labor, are virtually non-existent. Saadawi highlights the terrifying realities built into the marriage laws to prove this point.
Like Article 67 of the Egyptian marriage law.
Yes. For instance, legally, a husband has the right to refuse to pay alimony or provide financial support if his wife becomes sick or if she is imprisoned.
Because the marriage contract isn't based on mutual care, it's a labor contract. If she is sick, she can no longer perform the physical labor he purchased with the marriage dowry, so he stops paying for the upkeep of the machine.
That is the grim economic reality underlying the sacred vows. It is a closed-loop system designed by the ruling class. By enforcing this specific model of the patriarchal family, the state and the capitalist system shift the massive, incredibly expensive burden of rearing the next generation of workers entirely onto the unpaid backs of women.
They get a free workforce.
The economy gets a constant stream of fresh, healthy labor, and they don't have to pay a dime for the 20 years of care it took to produce them. They get free labor, disguised as a holy obligation.
And as society modernizes, it traps women in a completely schizophrenic double standard. We see this all over the world, where traditional cultures collide with global markets. Why is a woman simultaneously told to sell her body for capitalism and hide it under a black veil for religion?
You see this jarring double track everywhere in societies, transitioning into global capitalism. If you walk down a major street in a modernizing city, look at the visual messaging. On one side of the street, you have massive, towering billboards blasting hypersexualized consumerism.
Buy this lipstick, wear this tight dress, purchase this specific brand of lingerie to be an object of desire. Your worth is tied to how visibly attractive you are.
Right. It's a relentless demand for exposure. But on the exact same street, conservative clerics and religious campaigns are demanding that university girls cover themselves entirely in heavy black veils.
It feels like women are trapped in a tug-of-war between the shopping mall and the temple.
Exactly.
But if the religious authorities are suppressing the body, wouldn't that hurt the capitalists because people aren't buying the beauty products?
I'm struggling to see how these two extremes coexist.
They don't just coexist, they actively cooperate. Saadawi argues this isn't a war between capitalism and fundamentalism, it's a secret, highly functional alliance.
How does that work?
Let's look at the mechanism of how capitalism monetizes anxiety. The religious authorities suppress the body, label it sinful, and force it into fighting. This creates a massive society-wide psychological and sexual anxiety. People become obsessed with what is hidden.
Okay, so the repression creates a pressure cooker.
Exactly. And capitalism steps in to sell the release valve.
Yeah.
Because the public sphere is so restricted, the private sphere becomes hyper-commodified.
Oh, I see.
Capitalism sells expensive whitening creams, luxury lingerie meant only for the bedroom, and specialized, premium-priced, modest fashion. It sells media and entertainment that offer false escapism.
So the fake asceticism of the religious right acts as the ruling class's spiritual opium to tame the masses and keep them compliant.
While the capitalists pick their pockets by selling them the cure for the very anxiety the religion created, both systems require the woman's body to be controlled and commodified to function.
It's a perfect synergy.
That is brilliant and terrifying. But it makes me wonder, was it always like this? Was the historical demotion of women actually due to natural biological weakness, like we are often taught, or was it a deliberate economic invention?
Saadawi takes us all the way back to ancient Egypt to answer this, and it feels like a massive historical paradigm shift.
Walk us through it.
It is a complete inversion of how we are taught history. We tend to think of human history as a slow march from brutal inequality toward modern equality. Saadawi looks at the archaeological record and says, no, we actually went backward.
Backward?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the pre-dynastic era of ancient Egypt, if you look at the tombs and the carvings, men and women were drawn at exactly the same size.
Meaning they held equal social weight.
Yes. They were depicted equally. Women were head doctors, they were rulers, they were active in all spheres of public life. But then a massive shift occurs. From the 5th dynasty onward, the depictions of women in the art literally begin to shrink.
They get smaller and smaller compared to the men.
Exactly.
Why? Did human biology suddenly change? Did women suddenly lose their intelligence or strength?
No. What changed was the economy. The Fifth Dynasty marks the invention and consolidation of private land ownership. Before this, resources were more communal.
Yeah.
But once land became private, wealth could be accumulated, hoarded, and passed down. This created a new problem for the men who owned the land. They needed an absolute guarantee that the heirs inheriting their massive estates were their actual biological sons.
If you share resources, it doesn't matter whose kid is whose. But if you have an empire to pass down, you have to guarantee the bloodline. So to guarantee the heir, you have to lock down the womb.
You're seeing the precise mechanism. Women's bodies were suddenly downgraded from equal partners in society to the private property of men.
So the patriarchal family wasn't invented out of divine decree or biological destiny.
No, it was invented out of a strict economic necessity to control the inheritance of real estate.
That is mind-blowing. The patriarchy was basically invented to protect property deeds.
It really was.
But if women were previously equal and powerful, they wouldn't just accept being locked up. To enforce this new economic reality, the ruling class had to rewrite the spiritual reality. How did the ultimate goddess of creation get demoted to a meaningless spare rib?
You achieve compliance through theological propaganda. You contrast the ancient myths with the newer monotheistic ones. Look at the ancient Egyptian myth of Isis.
Okay, what was her role?
Isis was the ultimate source of wisdom in that culture. She was the active creator. The story goes that when the male god Osiris was torn to pieces, it was Isis who traveled the world, physically reassembled him, and brought him back to life.
So she was the actor, he was the subject.
She represented the head, the intellect.
But fast forward thousands of years to the later patriarchal religions, you get the story of Eve.
Right.
Eve isn't a creator. She doesn't build Adam. She is born out of Adam's crooked rib. She is literally an afterthought, a secondary accessory made from a spare part.
And worse than being an accessory, she is slapped with the label of original sin. The new patriarchal order used mythology to fundamentally rewrite history.
They stripped the female of her head, her wisdom, and her active power.
They turned her into a symbol of temptation, bodily sin, and spiritual weakness. And why? To justify why she had to be locked inside the house, covered up and completely controlled by the husband. It was an economic takeover, justified by a rewritten divine law.
And that control extends to how many wives a man can legally own. Which brings up a fascinating contradiction.
Yes, sir.
Why is polygamy sold as a religious necessity for reproduction when the poor men at the bottom of society can't even afford to marry one wife?
Because polygamy, much like the shrinking artwork of the Fifth Dynasty, is fundamentally an economic tool masquerading as a religious rite.
How so?
We're told polygamy exists to ensure everyone gets married, or to satisfy male sexual nature. But look at the actual social pyramid. The rich minority at the top of the pyramid hoard all the resources. They hoard the land, they hoard the sheep, and they hoard the women.
So the rich landowner has 4 wives and maybe a dozen concubines, but what about the poor laborer at the bottom?
He is forced into absolute celibacy because he literally can't afford the dowry to marry even once.
So this idea of chastity and strict moral rules, it's really just a cage forced upon the poor and the women, while the rich write exemptions for themselves.
That is the reality of agrarian economics. Polygamy isn't just about satisfying male sexual desire. It's an ancient method of accumulating wealth.
Explain that part.
In an agrarian farming society, wives and children are free agricultural labor. The more wives a rich landowner has, the more free labor he commands, the more crops he harvests, and the richer he gets.
Wow.
The poor man stays poor because he can't afford the initial investment of a wife. Polygamy is a mechanism of class domination just as much as it is gender domination.
So how did this happen within the Islamic world specifically? Because Saadawi is writing from Egypt, looking at Islamic history. How did a faith that initially gave women massive economic power devolve into a system that locked them behind high harem walls?
Saadawi is very careful to make a sharp distinction between the original texts and what the religion became centuries later. She points back to early Islam during the time of the Prophet. Women had significant agency.
Give me an example.
Khadija, the Prophet's first wife, was a wealthy, highly independent merchant who actually employed him. Women in that era directly questioned the Prophet, they participated in public debates, they rode into battle, and they held independent wealth.
But you look at the later feudal periods, like the Ottoman Empire, and it's a completely different universe.
Night and day.
Women are locked in high-walled harems. They are guarded by eunuchs. They are treated as literal objects of pleasure, completely removed from public life. How does a religion flip 180 degrees like that? What does feudalizing a faith actually look like on the ground?
It's a slow, deliberate process of corruption by those in power. Imagine an invading king or a feudal warlord who consolidates power. He wants to show off his wealth by collecting hundreds of concubines, which the original, simpler tenets of the faith don't really support.
Right.
So what does he do? He hires court scholars. He pays theologians to reinterpret the texts, to elevate obscure, restrictive verses, and to suppress the egalitarian ones.
So they just rewrote the rules to fit their lifestyle.
Over 1,000 years, these feudal rulers twisted the religious doctrines, enforcing the most rigid patriarchal interpretations to put a holy blessing on their hoarding of wealth, slaves, and women. They changed the religion to protect their thrones.
Okay, here is where the deep dive gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people in the West, because Saadawi turns her critical eye toward us.
Yes, she does.
Why do Western cameras furiously flash at the Iranian Shador, but conveniently shut off when it comes to imperialist bombs and stolen oil?
This is a vital part of her argument, and again, we are impartially reporting her stance here. Saadawi levies a brutal, unflinching critique against Western media and Western feminism. She points out a gross, systemic hypocrisy.
Which is what?
Western activists will fly across the world to furiously protest African circumcision. They will write endless articles about the tragedy of Middle Eastern veiling. They will center their entire outrage on the cultural practices of the East.
But they stay dead silent on the geopolitical plundering.
Exactly.
They don't talk about the multinational corporations draining the region of its wealth. They don't talk about the economic strangulation, the trade wars, or the actual bombs dropping. They ignore the global economic machinery that leads to the millions of starving infants we mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Saadawi's argument is that concepts like cultural modernization and human rights campaigns are often just shiny halos worn by multinational giants to distract from their own violence.
So they point a finger at the backward cultural practices of the East.
Because as long as everyone is arguing about the veil, no one is looking at the oil pipelines. The Western economic plunder is actively destabilizing those regions, causing the extreme poverty and chaos that actually harms women the most.
It's a sleight of hand. Look at this cultural oppression over here. Don't look at the bank robbery over there. So if Western intervention isn't the answer, what about adopting Western lifestyles? Does that offer an escape?
You'd think so, but no.
Why does tossing the veil for a miniskirt and a Dior bag fail to bring true liberation?
Because, as Saadawi argues, it's just swapping one cage for another. She draws a sharp contrast between two types of women. First, you have the elite, modern, urban woman. She sits in a cafe, smoking a pipe, drinking whiskey, wearing European designer clothes.
And she genuinely thinks she's liberated because she has cast off traditional religious dress.
Right.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, isn't the freedom to wear what you want, to drink what you want, a form of personal liberation?
Saadawi says, no, not in this structural context. Because while her clothes have changed, the elite woman's mind is still completely caged by consumerism and the desperate need for male validation.
She has just modernized her objectification.
Exactly. She is spending her wealth to conform to a Western capitalist standard of beauty. Now contrast her with the peasant woman toiling in the fields. The peasant woman doesn't wear a veil because it's physically impractical for manual labor. She doesn't wear makeup.
Because true working women don't need expensive cosmetics, they need basic survival, they need human rights, they need fair wages, and they need freedom from physical exhaustion.
Buying a Dior bag doesn't dismantle the patriarchy. It just funds global capitalism. The illusion of choice isn't the same as actual power.
Which leads us to the ultimate false promise of modernization under the current system, getting a job. We are told that entering the workforce is the ultimate ladder of liberation. But why does getting a job turn into a double shackle for women?
I found the data on this fascinating. The sources note that divorce rates are significantly higher among paid working women in Egypt and Syria compared to traditional housewives.
Why is that? Are they just happier and now they finally have the money to leave bad marriages?
The reality is much darker than empowerment. In a patriarchal society, entering the workforce without changing the domestic laws doesn't liberate a woman. It exploits her twice.
Explain that.
She goes to the factory or the office all day where she is exploited by her boss for low wages. Then she returns home. And what happens? She's expected to perform the exact same unpaid domestic labor, the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, as a full-time housewife.
It's the double bind. She is working 2 full-time jobs, but only getting paid a fraction for one of them.
And if she complains, if she says she is too tired to cook because she was at the office, if she shows even a hint of financial independence because she finally has her own paycheck,
The husband feels his absolute authority is threatened. He threatens her with divorce. The legal system steps in and labels her disobedient.
she is socially isolated by her community for failing her duties. Work, without a fundamental restructuring of marriage laws, male expectations, and domestic responsibilities, just becomes a second, exhausting mechanism of control.
So we need to take a step back and look at the whole board here. We have journeyed through medical atrocities, hidden family traumas behind closed doors, ancient Egyptian history, and global agrarian economics.
We've covered a lot of ground.
What is the overarching mechanism here? The ultimate takeaway from Saadawi's work is that this isn't just a history lesson about the Middle East.
Not at all.
The liberation of women is inextricably linked to the very structure of global civilization. You simply cannot untangle gender oppression from class, from economics, and from geopolitical power.
That is the core thesis. As long as there is an exploitative class system that demands cheap labor and hoards wealth at the top, women will bear the heaviest burden at the bottom.
You can't just fix one piece of it.
No. Saadawi is telling us that you cannot cure the deep, systemic disease of patriarchy by treating the symptoms with expensive makeup, or by dropping bombs in the name of human rights, or even just by offering equal pay within a fundamentally broken exploitative system.
You have to dismantle the entire machinery of exploitation.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final, chilling thought to mull over as we close this out. Saadawi wrote this decades ago, but look at where we are today. As we rush headfirst into our modern era, this new world of the digital gig economy, of artificial intelligence, of borderless global capital.
Are we actually moving forward?
Right. Or are we just inventing invisible new veils? Are we building digital harems? Are we repeating the exact same history of unpaid labor and exploitation, just masking it with shinier technology and better corporate branding?
It's a question we have to ask ourselves.
Think back to the roar of that geopolitical machinery we talked about at the very beginning of the show. The oil profits soaring while the vulnerable vanish into the margins. That machine hasn't stopped. It's still running right now. The question is, now that Saadawi has shown you the hidden gears, what are you going to do about it?